I know this is a huge ask and I probably won't get it, but if they can do something, if they can do anything that will help me wrap my head around this damn Zelda timeline, then that is the most welcome thing that could come of Breath of the Wild 2.
Well,
it's nonsensical.
In 2017, we got what this podcast called the Game of the Decade in The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. It's a game we keep finding ourselves going back to over these past couple years. Now, with a chance, just a chance, that we may get Breath of the Wild 2 this year, we decided to have a little conversation about what we want to see in that game. Welcome everyone to another edition of A Cast of the Past. I am your host for today, Ryan McNulty from Boston, Massachusetts. Joining me, of course, Keith Hamilton from London, Ontario. So, Keith, I know you've been playing Breath of the Wild recently, so it's been really fresh in your mind. How's your experience going, kind of revisiting the game after a couple of years?
It is unbelievable how good that game is. When we were reviewing Wind Waker, and that episode is available in the archives a few months ago, the whole time I was just thinking to myself, like, man, I just want to play Breath of the Wild again. So after we finished Wind Waker, after we recorded the episode, like 20 minutes later, I popped in Breath of the Wild and started playing again, started from scratch, because I think the last time I played it was like 2018, and it had been a while, so I needed to refresh my memory. Started from scratch, and now here I am, like almost 60 shrines in, 4 divine beasts, checking out the expansion pass, and just getting ready to take my run at Calamity Ganon.
Awesome, yeah. Everyone knows who listens to this podcast more than a couple episodes. I am a huge Zelda fan. And yeah, Breath of the Wild was a game that really reignited my love for single-player games. For a couple of years, I was kind of into more like games like Hearthstone and World of Warcraft and Overwatch, things like that. Basically, a lot of Blizzard and stuff.
Yeah.
And then I played Breath of the Wild, and I was like, oh my god, why don't I play more single-player games? Like, I was in love with that game. For a week straight, I would basically go to work, come home, play the game nonstop until I went to bed, and then rinse and repeat.
Yeah,
every day.
That sounds like my first experience with Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, I just couldn't put the game down, and it is still one of my favorite games, one of my favorite Zelda games, of course. And it's been a few years now, and we know the time span between Zelda games can be a long wait. I mean, sometimes we'll get a handheld game in between. We got the Link's Awakening kind of remake for the Switch, but everybody is really waiting for Breath of the Wild 2. And I think I want to say 2019, we got the little sneak
teaser.
The teaser trailer.
E3.
And this is a classic Nintendo thing to do. They'll give you a trailer, and particularly with Zelda games, you'll get something, and then it's nothing for 2.5 years.
Yeah.
And then you get a trailer, and then the game comes out in like 2 months. That's normally what we get. So, Breath of the Wild, we got nothing. We got that initial preview at E3, and then we got nothing for like 2 years.
So I just want to clarify something, because this bothers me every time somebody talks about this new Breath of the Wild game. Mm-hmm. At any point, has Nintendo called it Breath of the Wild 2? Because
they said in the trailer, it says
that teaser.
Sequel. It says the sequel to Breath of the Wild.
Yeah, so we don't actually know if it's Breath of the Wild 2 or if it's just something else that's the sequel.
Yeah, I mean, the name of it probably will not be Breath of the Wild 2. It's just, that's the easy name to call it, right? Mm-hmm. It's really comes down to, they said they call it the sequel to Breath of the Wild, so we know it's a direct follow-up. Other than that, we don't know the name. So for simplicity's sake, like, we just call Breath of the Wild 2.
Breath of the Wild 2. That's fair. It's not accurate, but it's fair.
Nobody's saying it like that's the final name.
Mm-hmm.
Like, for a long time, Breath of the Wild was just called Zelda Wii U. And then until we knew what the actual name
And then it was
is.
stripped away from the Wii U.
Exactly. Then the Wii U, they got like the pity release. At least it came out the same day, because for Twilight Princess, they actually like screwed over the GameCube version, and you had to wait like 2 months before it came out.
I remember that. And then they made like the run of it insanely limited. Like it was really hard to find that GameCube version.
That copy's worth a lot. Thank God Twilight Princess HD came out, so I don't have to care about the GameCube version, because that was the way better version in my opinion. Just because, Twilight Princess wasn't. They kind of tacked on the motion controls for that, as opposed to like Skyward Sword. But anyway, enough about Twilight Princess. It's all about Breath of the Wild. So, given that the experience is super fresh in your mind, even like the littlest things for Breath of the Wild 2, based on your Breath of the Wild experience, what are some features or stories, anything, what do you want to see in the sequel that you feel like you want either more of, or them to fix something about, what you're experiencing now?
So it's a weird one when I think about the sequel to Breath of the Wild, just because of how open and vast that Hyrule is in that. It feels weird to just have another game that you're going around that again. And I don't know what they do to solve that, but that's what I hope the game isn't. Where we're just like, oh, some time has passed and we're going to the same Kakariko village, and there's Impa, and there's the weird scientist lady who de-aged, and you're just kind of going through the greatest hits of Breath of the Wild again, Hyrule-wise. But the thing that I want more of, because it is, I think you can chalk this up to the reason why the game is such a success and such a breath of fresh air, pun intended, for the Zelda franchise, and that's the shrines. Like, if you just give me like 200 more of those shrines, I will give you all the money for that game. Like, those, that is such a good part of the game, and as I go back and play the game again, it's the thing that I enjoy the most running into, like finding the shrine and either figuring out the puzzle to get into it or figuring out the puzzle that lives inside of it. Like, to me, that is such a superior approach to the traditional Zelda dungeon that you find in the rest of the franchise. Like, if they just give me more of those, that is really all I want from Breath of the Wild. But find a way to kind of tweak the experience so it's not just another gallivant through Hyrule.
Interesting. So I think you would actually be a little bit in the minority there with what you want to see from Breath of the Wild 2, because I think shrines... I think shrines are something where people want something different. The big criticism of Breath of the Wild from the Zelda community was that there was no traditional dungeons, right? The divine beasts were too short and a little bit disappointing in some aspects. And then the shrines, they were kind of like each one a mini dungeon, and they all had the same aesthetic. So that was kind of a disappointment. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy the shrines, and I think the divine beasts, for what they are, can be good. But for...
Who cares if they're the same aesthetic?
I mean, I care. I mean, it does when you're used to like, a forest temple, a fire temple, a water temple. And you see they got really creative with a lot of the dungeons in some of the games, like Twilight Princess. You're in Snow Peak Ruins, is this iced over mansion where you help Yetis make soup. It's crazy, but it's one of my favorite dungeons. And Skyward Sword has a sand ship. It's literally like this abandoned ship that is its own dungeon. When they start to really get creative with that stuff, there's some of the best experiences in Zelda. And I would love to see some of that return. Like, don't get me wrong, I do enjoy the shrines, and I wouldn't mind if they kept them in. But definitely when it comes to things like the Divine Beast, I would love for them to go in a different direction. And if you
I will agree that the Divine Beasts are a disappointing aspect of that game. Like, the second that you start, like, clicking because all 4 of them have their gimmick. Like the second that you figure out that gimmick and you're really getting through it and you're making progress, then it just kind of ends. Like, boom, now I have all the
Especially
terminals.
if you know where everything is and you replay them, you can do them all in about 5 minutes or less. Like they're that fast.
For real, the Zora one I beat in about 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Boss fight and all.
Yeah, I can beat the bird one extremely fast because there's some, and don't get me wrong, there's some fun stuff you can do because of the way Breath of the Wild is built. You can get really creative, like even like the bird divine beast, you can like tilt it immediately and you can skip a puzzle by just flying out the side and like going back in another area, like window, and skip an entire puzzle and get right to the terminal. There's some hilariously creative things you can do, and I appreciate that. But it's the fact that the divine beast replaced dungeons that is kind of, I think, a lot of the problem people have. If you had traditional dungeons and the divine beasts, that would be awesome, but I'm not asking for
But what if you
both.
looked at it the other way of what if you had traditional dungeons and shrines, like kind of the shrines
I think that would
where...
be a great mix. And I think there's a good possibility that that's what we're getting. From the little footage that we have of this trailer, it seems like they're underground, and I know there was a brief glimpse of like this entranceway that looked like the entrance to a dungeon. So people speculate, although we're going to likely have the same Hyrule map above ground, that there might be something that happens that opens up these kind of underground passageways, and maybe that's where a lot of these traditional dungeons are, or something happens. Because also in that trailer there's like a moment where you see Hyrule Castle kind of like almost rising out of the ground, so some big like earthquake could happen that like shakes up some of the landscape, and they could have these like dungeons in there. Either way, that is something that's my biggest ask of Breath of the Wild 2, is give us some more of these kind of like cool thematic dungeons and give us the same Breath of the Wild gameplay. You know, obviously new weapons, things like that. Maybe add a teeny bit more durability to the weapons. Just a teeny bit. I'm not asking a lot, you know.
Or at least make it so there's easier ways to get more weapon slots than just having to find Korok seeds until you're blue in the face. Because, I'm not a person that really minds the durability issue, because in some weapons it is very prominent, but I like the gameplay loop of like, you're beating a bunch of moblins and then you find a skeleton one and your weapon breaks and now you're beating them with that skeleton's arm. Like, that's awesome. That feels good.
I agree. I think a lot of people definitely complain about that too much, because I like the game design of, hey, you can never just like sit on a bunch of these OP weapons and then use them for the rest of the game. Like, you always have to be on the hunt for new weapons. And it kind of prevents you from doing like the old RPG, like stash away a million potions kind of mentality of, I'm going to have like 500 of my best weapons just there just in case. It's like, no, you end up having to use a lot of those weapons because you literally ran out of all your other weapons, and you're in the middle of a fight.
Except for the flame blade and the frost blade. Never touch those, because those are just weather sticks to me.
Yeah, they can be nice for like if you get use fire for something, for a puzzle, or light a campfire and you can just keep it safe. Or if you just need to if you're in a cold area,
chill out.
Yeah. So, I think that mechanic's fine. I would maybe tweak it to maybe have them be slightly more durable, but not too much. I think it was just slightly out of balance, and also just let us deal with the rain. That's another big miss. Is they should have made a really hard to get outfit that let you climb in the rain.
Oh my god, I know. Because there is that one, it's like a grappler's outfit that helps you, but it doesn't do it.
Yeah, that was the annoying one miss, in my opinion. Well, that's one of the big misses. Is there anything else you want to see?
Before that, I do have a question for you.
Okay.
Being somebody that is more like you're looking for more of like a dungeon, a traditional dungeon experience in this, or in potentially Breath of the Wild 2. With that, and I mean, there's an exception of a couple of games that kind of breeds a more linear experience in these Zelda games, where you kind of have your list of temples that you need to do in a particular order. Is that what you're looking for in more, or like in the sequel? Because that kind of goes against the vast openness of Breath of the Wild. Or are you looking for something that kind of finds like that sweet spot? Because I can see where you're going with wanting more of like a, basically like an expanded Divine Beast, like make a more dungeon style thing. But I fear that that will lose some of the spirit of Breath of the Wild, of just being able to pick a direction and go.
Where all of a sudden you are going to get like gatekeeped out of areas, right? Where normally Breath of the Wild, you can literally do anything at any time once you're off the plateau, which I completely respect.
The other side of that is like you could go do them in any order, but then you're assuming like if you have climbing, you're assuming that anybody can do it at any time and stuff like that, and it almost limits it.
So what I would like to see is somewhat of a compromise, I would say, because I also feel like the story of Breath of the Wild, it has some cool moments with like the flashbacks, but most of the interesting stuff happened in the past, right? With the memories. Yeah. And because of the non-linear approach of the story, it ends up being kind of like not that great compared to some of the other games. So I think what I would like to see is if you keep shrines, then you can still kind of have that openness. So you can do any of the shrines in any order, whatever. But maybe for the dungeons, some of them do have to be locked away. But I'd still like for there to be some choice, right? So maybe you have your first 3 dungeons and you can do those in any order. Then you have your next 5 dungeons and you can do those in any order. So you do have like breaks where if the plot needs to catch up, like after your 3 dungeons, there's some big story development. And then after your next 5, there's another big story development before like the final dungeon or something like that. I think that's one way that they could approach it. So yes, you are going to get like gatekeeped out of some of these areas, but it also will I feel like it will help them tell a more linear story, but still letting you choose. You just have a small choice of like which dungeons you want to do in what order.
Okay. Yeah, that seems like a good middle ground for that.
Yeah, and I mean, I think we got this pure openness in Breath of the Wild 2, so I'm okay if they want to do like a little bit of a hybrid for this one. So it's like we always have Breath of the Wild as that game that you can do anything in any order, and Breath of the Wild 2 can be that game where it's like, yes, there's a lot of freedom, but we're going to tell a more linear story. We're going to have more complicated dungeons and stuff like that.
Fair.
Cool. Anything else with your current experience? I know a big one that comes to my mind as well is, can we get some better and more interesting bosses in the game? That was another weakness of Breath of the Wild.
I was going to expand that out to enemies in general, because like all of the enemies in Breath of the Wild are cool, but once you figure out their gimmick, you're kind of like, you can just kind of cakewalk through them. Like I would even extend that to like the tough Lynels and Guardians and that stuff. If that's all that's there in Breath of the Wild 2, then I feel like it's going to be a bit of a disappointment. Like if I spent all of this time mastering the Guardian deflection from the shield thing, which I have put a lot of hours into that in this recent playthrough, and I'm pretty damn good at it now. Like if I can just take that skill, go right into Breath of the Wild and take care of Guardians, like I feel like I might bounce off of that game harder than I would otherwise. So if there's ways to add twists into that and keep Thunderblight Ganon away from it as far as possible, because that thing is still a piece of crap the second time I played it through, then I feel like that's a good direction to go. I'm not saying that that's the right way to go, because I mean, I imagine in a lot of people's cases, like if you're not like me and you haven't touched this game in a few years, like it was not easy to relearn that timing for the Guardians and making sure that you're taking advantage of your split-second windows when you're trying to take out a Lionel. Like those skills are forgotten, so I can understand if that's what they go with, but I'm hoping it's not.
Yeah, I agree, and
screw Thunderblight Ganon.
We need new bosses that aren't just like these weird, like Calamity Ganon ripoffs. And we also, if there are repeat enemies, they should change up their attack patterns so it isn't the same exact thing. But I would like to just see straight up new enemies. I don't think Guardians need to be in this game. I don't think any.
You've taken care of them all.
Yeah, because the Calamity version of Calamity Ganon should be done. We're probably going to get like that trailer. It has Ganondorf from what people have been able to tell. It has he has the Gerudo stuff on him. That corpse in the trailer is most likely Ganondorf. So let's take things in a different direction. Let's see what they do. Hopefully we get just completely new enemies, a much bigger variety. That definitely would go a long way. And yeah, for the love of God, give us some better, more interesting looking bosses and, overall just more interesting boss fights in the game. The DLC did have a pretty interesting boss fight. I don't think you've gotten there yet, but
no, I haven't yet. I've just started the Trial of the Champion DLC, and it's been good so far. But hear me out here.
Yeah.
Instead of things like Thunderblight and Waterblight Ganon, what if we had Waterblight Ganondorf? Huh?
No,
huh?
Please no.
Huh?
No, thank you. No more Blight, whatever. Especially because I played Age of Calamity, and you have to fight all of them in Age of Calamity too. So I am more than over those guys for now. But hey, if you want more of the whole Breath of the Wild story, Age of Calamity it's worth picking up. I know you liked kind of some of that Hyrule Warriors stuff, so...
Yeah, I enjoyed my time with Hyrule Warriors, and that leads me to something else that I want from this game, and I know this is a huge ask, and I probably won't get it, but if they can do something, if they can do anything that will help me wrap my head around this damn Zelda timeline, then that is the most welcome thing that could come of Breath of the Wild 2.
Well,
it's nonsensical. We've spent weeks trying to explain this to me, and I don't get it because it doesn't make sense. The Zelda timeline is just like somebody threw facts at a wall like there's spaghetti, and there's just this spaghetti splat on the wall of Zelda stuff. And it makes no sense.
A cheap plug for my channel, GameEssays.com. I did do a video on the Zelda timeline. And not really like, how does the timeline go in chronological order for like the actual time of the games, but I did it from the perspective of from release order, right? Because that was to show how did we get here? How did the Link to the Past end up being in like this what if scenario, like that kind of stuff?
Why are they making what ifs of things that never happened in the video games? Explain. I don't get it. And why are all the games on that timeline? I don't get it.
Things are in the what if timeline because they tried to make one game a backstory to another game, and then they got the details wrong, and then they made other games that were sequels to that game. So that's where it got all just completely. If your brain didn't break there, then I'm sorry.
I'm a fan of Resident Evil, and that has gone like. We took a left turn 4 games ago in that, and it makes no sense. And we're talking about like Spanish cults and Zelda. I still can't wrap my head around that. Like that's fine to me. The Spanish death cults, I get the what if scenario of what happens if the hero of time loses.
It's a retcon, is all you need to know. I'm surprised, Keith. You can wrap your mind around all the shenanigans of Metal Gear Solid, but you can't grasp this one. It blows me away.
It's the nano machines.
Well, on that note, I think it's time to wrap things up. But
I
definitely,
think so. Back to going to try and figure out this damn timeline.
yeah, definitely. If you enjoyed this conversation, you want to continue it, discuss it with us, head over to our Discord at castofthepast.com/Discord. I'll jump at the chance to talk anything Zelda, so definitely you can at me on Discord on that one.
Yeah, slide into those Zelda DMs,
Yeah.
those Discord server DMs, and if you have anything that can help me understand the timeline, or even just cool videos of like Breath of the Wild shrines, because I always enjoy those too, of like how somebody took a bomb in a raft and managed to blow themselves into the end of a shrine. Like those are the best. So just send those my way at castofthepast.com/Discord.
To this day, people are still figuring out new ways to do things, and that's the beauty of the game.
That and Wii U mods. That is the real beauty of that game.
I'll have to see some of that. But thanks everyone for joining again. If you enjoyed this episode, join us on the Discord. You can also leave a comment or subscribe to any on any of your favorite podcast app, or subscribe on the YouTube channel. It definitely helps us out, as well as leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. So once again, thank you guys for joining us, and we'll see you next time on another A Cast
to the
Past.